but it's about having a peace that goes beyond outer circumstances. I recently had the honor of doing a memorial service for a family that's part of our community, and it was one of the most beautiful, heartwarming memorial services I have been able to be present to. When the family was sharing with me those special details about their father, they were talking about during his treatment, they were driving along one day and he noticed that it was raining outside as it was, and he said, "It's a beautiful day." That was his practice. He was always noticing what's just beyond the rain or what's in the rain. He also, in the middle of treatment, looked up and noticed how the clouds were changing, how they were crisper. It turns out that part of his treatment actually, I think, improved his vision. But how many of us would have noticed the clouds in the midst of treatment or in the midst of what he was going through? How many of us would have stopped to notice the contour, the definition of the clouds shifting slightly? How they look shifting. To have enough space, to pause enough to notice. Would you have noticed? How many of us stopped to see the sunset, to watch the moon, to walk in the rain? This Christmas journey, the story of the awakening of the Christ consciousness or the birth of the Christ, is a story about people who noticed. The wise men listened. They heard, they felt, they got an intuition, they had an experience, and they moved with it. The shepherds noticed the star and followed it. What does it take to notice all of the subtleties that lead us to a state of peace? The first Sunday in Advent is the Sunday of hope or faith. And that's the beginning part, that's the launching space. But the next experience is the development of peace. And without the development of peace, it's thought that we won't get to experience the birth of the Christ. Now, when we say peace, I'm not talking about, are we ready for me to let go of this? I'm not talking about the peace that comes from your microphone working. I'm not talking about the peace that comes from living in a land where we are blessed not to hear bombs going off every night. I'm not talking about the peace that someone has or doesn't have because they have a house full of 7 children or not. That can't be the peace that they were talking about in Scripture. That can't be the peace that has to be developed to experience the birth of the Christ within us and among us. Because we know the human condition is such that we cannot control those outer senses of peace all the time, right? So what are we talking about here? What are we talking about, this condition of peace to birth the Christ consciousness? How reachable are we? How still is it in our mind? I believe that is the question. I believe the stillness that goes beyond what we think of as peace is what we're talking about developing. And we have the ability to develop that capacity, though we often don't. Can we expand that capacity? You probably know the easy answer. It's the answer in a lot of Unity sermons, and it's meditation, right? But if the answer were that short today, I would say, okay, we're done. Let's go home now. Do you think it's possible to have a meditative practice and still not have peace in the other moments of the day that aren't included in that little 20-minute segment at the beginning of the day, at the end of the day, or the 5-minute segments that you put in? Sometimes we have a meditative practice and we feel peace when we're meditating, but the rest of the time we are out of the center of peace. So what else is there? I was recently having Thanksgiving with my family in Indiana, and my dad was driving Georgia and I to the airport. And as we were driving, he started talking about Georgia. And, part of it was probably I was a little nervous about the long airport ride, because one thing she does not like or does not have peace during our car rides. Yeah, odd, because other babies go to sleep when you get in the car. No, we tried to drive to Indiana, got 3 hours to go about a half an hour, came back. So he may have been trying to distract me with deeper conversation, but anyway, it goes like this. He is remarking at the changes that are going on in Georgia, even in the little bit of time he had with her, and talking about neurons firing and talking about all the things that she's seeing that she didn't see before and the developments that are happening. And he says it's like driving on this road. We're looking out at the same thing. But he said, this is what's happening in her brain. She's seeing different things. He said, we're looking out at the same road, but I'm seeing cars, taillights, and lines on the road. When you're looking out, you're seeing the horizon, trees. You're seeing other things, right? It's all there. We're 2 people with eyes, or 3 people with eyes. We're all looking at the same thing and seeing different things. When we expand our inner capacity of peace, we are able to see what is there that we're not paying attention to. And that may seem simple, but that is the key to everything. And without that, we cannot birth the next stage. Without that, we cannot move forward. How many of you hear the spaces in between the words? How many of you, when you're sitting in a sanctuary or in a movie theater, how many of you hear the crinkle if someone takes out a cough drop? You can hear that crinkle? If someone gets in their purse, if someone moves something. Yet, at home, we can have the TV on even when we're not watching it. We can have the radio on right when we get in the car. We can go from sound to sound to sound. But in a sanctuary, when there's one crinkle, we turn and it gets our attention. This is how the mind is in life. We turn and things get our attention. And we tend to drown that out with the TV, with the radio, with the constant noises and the constant sounds. And we tend to have our attention drawn by the little rappers making sounds and disturbing us. But can we be pulled by a different sound? Have we listened to our minds when nothing's going on? Are there crinkles? Are there sounds? Or is there peace? Is there space? What we're cultivating in the Advent season is more than meditation, and it's more than what a sitting meditation practice gives us. We're cultivating stillness. Stillness can be uncomfortable. Silence can be uncomfortable. We think of peace as being something we have to get, and we have to get it from outer circumstances setting us up to experience it. But that's not the peace that is talked about in the scripture. It's cultivating a quiet mind, creating space. Asking yourself what brings your soul, your mind, your being into stillness, and creating more of that, expanding that. Is it something that we even look at? Maybe for some of us, it's clearing physical space. Have you ever experienced that? I have something that happens before I even start to do a talk. I have to clean. It's the weirdest thing. It doesn't matter how much time I have to have the space clear and the space clean, and I have to have it clear enough and clean enough so I can listen. Deepak Chopra calls it eavesdropping on the mind of God. It's what's referred to in the metaphysics of the wise men and the shepherds. But it's listening to what's beyond each moment, what is beyond the crackling of a wrapper opening that takes our constant attention, or the TV that takes our constant attention. It's the other rhythm, the other sound, the other heartbeat. It's the universe that is always generating, always speaking, always offering peace. But we often walk by. If we are to cultivate and expand our capacity for stillness, it goes beyond those meditation moments, and it goes into every moment. It means making peace with memories and listening to the mind. When there's nothing going on in the mind, is it telling stories of injury? Is it worrying? What is it doing? And can we pause and create stillness there? When we're in our homes, what can we do to pause and create stillness? When we're in the midst of conflict, what can we do to pause and create stillness? It's through the stillness that we find our peace. I have a minister friend who has an alarm set on her phone so it chimes every hour so she remembers to breathe. Do you ever find yourself saying in a moment when you're rushing around, just stopping and saying, breathe? When you do, something happens. And it may seem trite. But when you do, you might be ready to leave the house without your phone or without your keys, or you may be overlooking something that's lost. But when you just pause and really jump into the stillness, it is full. And it is always full of whatever is needed in the moment. Think about that. The stillness is full of whatever you need in the moment. How is it feeling right now to have so much stillness, even in the talk? Is it aggravating? Is it peaceful? Is there a window opening? How still is the mind? And are we willing to clear the space? When we do, we begin to birth the Christ. Richard Rohr, who is one of my favorite spiritual teachers of this time, he is a Franciscan priest in the Catholic denomination. He writes about incarnational mysticism, and he writes in this passage about the mystical mind. He says this: the presence of God is infinite, everywhere, always and forever. You cannot not be in the presence of God. There is no other place to be. He goes on to say, I could tell you that God is not elsewhere and heaven is not later, but until you come to personally and regularly experience that, you will not believe it. Only one thing is necessary, Jesus says. If you are present, you will be able to know what you need to know. Truly, seeing is both that simple and hard. Wisdom is the freedom to be truly present to what is right in front of you. Wisdom is the freedom to be truly present to what is right in front of you. There was an NPR show on Steve Jobs recently. It was a woman just kind of talking about his life, and she was sharing that in Steve's kind of ponderings on why he wanted to bring computers to us and why he really wanted to advance that technology, he said that he reflected on bicycles and how the human beings are just inferior. We were inferior to other creatures. But the bicycle, the invention of the bicycle, helped us get into the game. It gave us an expanded ability to show up because we could get places, right? We had speed. We could get away from things. We could get to things. It advanced us. And he said that he wanted to get into this. He wanted the computer because it was like a bicycle for the mind. A bicycle for the mind. So it was something that would aid the mind in doing what it was capable of doing. In the same way, friends, expanding our capacity for stillness is like a bicycle for the soul. It is the one thing we can cultivate that will allow the soul, allow the spirit to do as much of what it came here to do as is humanly possible and divinely ordained. It is like giving wings to our beings. It helps us follow the star to the birth of the Christ. It helps us remember the truth, in the words of Richard Rohr, that the presence of God is infinite, everywhere, always, and forever. You cannot not be in the presence of God. There is no other place to be. It is who we are. And it is we who are sometimes not present to the presence. But when we cultivate stillness, when we cultivate peace, we arrive. Namaste.